You're listening to Lifing Coast to Coast, the live stream podcast where we explore trending topics and personal development, wellness, and the art of lifing in today's ever-changing world. Join us every Saturday for insightful, relatable, and lively discussions that empower and inspire. I'm Moderator Miki here with the co-hostesses with the mostesses, Dr. Lovey and Heidi.
Really gotta get a new picture. My hair is not that color. Welcome back. Welcome back to Lifing Coast to Coast. My name is Miki. Before we go any further, I just want to remind everyone who is listening and watching to find us on social media. We are Lifing Coast to Coast on YouTube and Facebook, and we are Lifing C2C on Instagram. And check out our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Pod, iHeartRadio, and Amazon. We're everywhere. And also our website, lifing.services. And so here we are. We are doing something a little bit differently today. This has been pre-recorded. My name is Moderator Miki, and I'm here with the co-hostesses. With the mostesses, we have Heidi and Dr. Lovey back again.
Hey, Miki.
Hey.
So we're here. We did an amazing episode on relationships, and it is Love Month. Mm-hmm. And just, I'm keeping with the vibe of love. And I thought about when we were doing that podcast how I am single. And all I could think about was like self-love. Self-love, self-love, self-love. So that's what I want to talk about today.
I love that. It's the basis for all real love, like, sustainable, real romantic love, deeper interpersonal relationships. It all starts with that piece of it. So, yeah.
What was it like growing up? When did you learn about what self-love is? I know we're all in different generations, so maybe we could talk about that. I think I learned about it a lot in music, to be honest, because, I'm a millennial. I love all of the, Lizzo and the Hype It Up and the girl power. Spice Girls were big for me. I think Spice Girls was where I really was like, oh yeah, love yourself. So that's me.
Yeah, culturally, I'm a boomer, and there was nothing but put yourself last. There just wasn't. It was not that world. I was born in the 50s. Think about it. That said, my mom was a trailblazer in that she was always a feminist since when I could remember. And since I was one of 4 girls and, she espoused that feminism to us and for us, there was an air of, you don't have to. In fact, you don't get to, because I remember her saying, don't ever take typing, because all you'll ever get to be is a secretary.
Oh, yeah, secretary was a bad word.
Yeah. And so interestingly enough, I have taken typing 3 times, failed miserably each time, and I can't type to save my life. And that must be a mental block, huh, Dr. Lovey?
Uh-oh.
I'm not a good typer either.
I love typing. What about you, Doctor?
Well, I'm from, Generation X. So we are the lost generation. We were the latchkey kids, and we had to fend for ourselves. We drank the water out of the hose, and we weren't allowed in and out, in and out. We had to stay out, that kind of things. I think that I got mixed messages, for sure. Yeah, because I, on one side, was told, my mom, she would tell me that I needed to put myself first, but then she would show me that I needed to put other people before me. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And even, when I think about emotions like that, we were allowed to feel, I wasn't allowed to feel sad. Like I felt shamed for sadness, but I was allowed to be angry, but I didn't like that. So
it's interesting to feel angry and then have no place to go with it. That I always felt like it was a wall. Like, okay, I'm angry. Now what?
Yeah. My mom would tell me, go beat somebody up. Like that's how she was. She was a fighter. She was spicy. And I was not a fighter. So yeah. I did get into a fight one time, and she said, well, did you kick her ass? I'm like, Well,
That's all that
Mom,
matters. Did you
I was
win?
like, Mom, I got suspended. She's like, hmm. And my dad was more concerned about, well, is the friendship still okay? My mom was like, did you kick her ass? Well, good. It's worth being suspended then. Have fun at home, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, I love that take. I love that take. Just playing off of that
Yeah.
really quickly. When I was 9 in the Girl Scouts.
No.
Yes.
One time at band camp.
And one time in band camp, and I was a goody goody. I was a teacher's pet. I was sit in the front of the row, raise your hand, be good. I was her. But there was one girl in Girl Scouts who was teasing me about a boy that liked me. His name was Ed King. And I had long ringlets down to the middle of my back. And she was sitting behind me, sitting on the floor cross-legged, and she was pulling on my ringlets and saying, Ed loves you, Ed, and she was really taunting me. And I told her to stop a number of times, as you can imagine. And then I went to anger and I turned around and I basically punched her out. And I got thrown out of Girl Scouts.
Gosh, you were that girl. You were that girl. I would expect nothing less, to be honest.
And I think, honestly, when I told my mom about it, my mom, I know that she was good for you. Right. Basically taking care of yourself and not allowing that to happen. Was that good parenting? I don't know. But, I didn't get shamed for it. It was my natural response to the situation. So anyway.
Yeah. Speaking of,
you were allowed to be spicy. I was allowed to be spicy too. Yeah.
I wasn't really a spicy kid.
I wasn't either though.
I wasn't neither, but the permission, I think, was always there to be yourself. And I didn't talk back to my mom, honestly, until high school. And it was out of her putting a tremendous amount of responsibility on me to care for my younger siblings, and my 2 step siblings, 4 little girls, were my primary responsibility as a 15-year-old. Wow. And that was a lot, but yeah.
So a lot of parenting. Speaking of parenting, so you both have kids. So how growing up and going forward and
and grandkids
and grandkids and not really maybe having the language for self-love and expressing emotions for you both growing up, how have you taught your kids about how to express emotions?
Yeah. Well, I was just the opposite with my children as my parents were with me. So, I mean, I always would name their feeling and help them through it. Like, you're really angry right now, that kind of thing. You're feeling really sad, or you're really hurt.
Interesting to give them a name to think about. Did they ever question you or, go back at you and challenge you, say no, that isn't it?
Yeah, they'll tell you if they're not feeling what you say, and that's healthy. That's really good if they do that. Like, no, I'm not. I'm frustrated, or whatever. But yeah, my kids, that's how they made fun of me. Like when we like to play charades and stuff like that and imitating. That was one of the ways that they imitated me, and they would say, "How are you feeling right now? You must be hurt." And that's how and I'm like, "Oh, come on. We know who you're imitating me."
So funny.
Great. Well, when my kids were little, 2 things happened. I took parenting classes. I recognized that my own parenting was not stellar. And I thought, you know what? I want to at least have a basis in some research and some expertise before I, launch too far down the road of no return. And so when they were little toddlers, there was a Montessori program, and I enrolled my eldest son first when he was 18 months old, and the other one a year later when he was 18 months old. And then eventually my daughter went at 15 months because she was a girl, and she was like, I go school. And so they took her early. But what was wonderful about that foundationally was that was part of their preschool education, being asked, what are you feeling? Right. And so when I'll just take it, from the 2 boys, both being toddlers, when they would get into it, right, I would say, Ben, how are you feeling? I'm sad. Okay. Why are you sad? He took my toy. Oh, all right. Do you want to tell him? I'm sad, Alex. You took my toy. And they would kind of work it out, and it would be like, oh, here you go, and they had empathy, they were showing signs of feeling for the other when they were little like that. And then as they got older, there was an interesting shift. And that was instead of I'm sad, same scenario, took my thing or, whatever. I wanted the blue one or, the drill. And what I noticed, and I didn't know how to name it at the time, but now I know what that was. That anger, which is a secondary emotion, that was the emergence of the ego being attached to the act, that layer of pure love, feeling I'm sad, elevated secondary emotion to I'm angry. And I know Dr. Lovey is going to say anger is part of the primary emotions, which I get that. Yeah. But it is in essence when, people walk around talking about I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. What are you angry about? Da, 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 da. And if you keep probing, if you keep asking, they will get into I am frustrated. Yeah. I am scared. I am sad. There's so many things underneath.
Anger can be a primary emotion, but like Heidi was saying, it typically is for many of us. It's a secondary emotion. There's stuff underneath it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That blows my mind every time you say that. Just because, I think of like anger as something that you feel naturally, and then I was taught to always repress it.
That's true too. That's true too. Yeah.
So it feels like it is, my first instinct, but then like, okay, wait, I have to not show that.
Yeah, it might be because there are times when anger is the primary emotion. But what Heidi's talking about is for many of us, we're not allowed to feel hurt or we're not allowed to feel. And so anger is what it escalates to.
It masks the vulnerable emotion, especially sadness. You hurt my feelings. I'm hurt over here, and we don't, once we get a little older, we don't really want to be vulnerable. We want to be tough, right? We want to be, I'm rubber, you're glue. Everything you say to me bounces off me and sticks on you. I'm talking
so many times.
The child's mind, right? The child's mind. But for me, I'm recognizing when they were really little and tender, they were in that more pure heart space and less up in their head, judging it as I got wronged here, because then the boys started the finger pointing, which was blaming.
Yeah. Not taking responsibility for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is what? Emotional intelligence. That's what we're talking about. So you were talking about the primary emotions. Let's go over them. Let's talk about what they are. Dr. Lovey, I know
you
got the facts.
Well, okay. Well, first thing, I don't want to give a lesson, but there's a difference between emotions, feelings, and moods. And emotions they're short, visceral reactions, and there's universal emotions. There's 7 of them. And then the feelings are the subjective experience that comes from that emotion that we're having. So I'm feeling hurt, that kind of thing. And then a mood is more, it's longer lasting. It's, you wake up and you're in a certain type of mood. It's a disposition over an extended period. I can't say like over how long, but it's longer lasting.
I'm moody. I have always been a moody kid. I get that one. But so emotions.
Yeah. And so the universal emotions, these were discovered. I'm going to give credit to Paul Ekman because he's the only one that I know who really talked about the universal emotions as an anthropologist and a psychologist. And so those would be contentment or joy, right? Not contempt, but content or joy, happiness, fear, sadness, anger, disgust, contempt, which is a very interesting emotion, and it's an advanced emotion. It's a mix between disgust and anger. And then I don't know if I said surprise, but surprise is one that a lot of times isn't listed because it's such an emotion. It goes fast. It goes away fast.
Like it becomes something else, probably, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like Inside Out. This sounds like a movie that I know.
Yes, listeners, for any of you who may not have seen, maybe because you don't have littles, but the Inside Out 1 and Inside Out 2, it's a really beautifully done film that actually nuances the development from childhood of these emotions. And yeah, it's so good. They're both so good.
Even when you were like listing it out, I was like, oh, I know that character. I know what that looks like. So yeah, how can we, I don't know. Let me think. Let me think here.
Well, you were asking about emotional intelligence. And
Yeah.
so, Heidi, what are the key concepts of emotional intelligence? What is emotional intelligence?
So the concept of emotional intelligence, that is our ability to understand and manage rather our own emotions through the lens of how to become a better, more compassionate person, right? And to regulate our own emotions for our own comfort, honestly, as well. So there are 5 components. Basic components are empathy. So emotionally intelligent people can sense other people's discomfort or their pain, right? So it's about being able to lean in and open ourselves to what the other person might be feeling, right? And the other piece of that is effective communication, right? How to engage in a comfortable interaction and utilize our social skills, right? Not only read the room, but maybe the expression on the person's face, maybe sense if they're looking closed off, body language, can play a part in there. The third thing really is our self-awareness, like our ability to recognize what our strengths and our weaknesses are, to know when to step back, to know how to discern thoughts into words before we act or speak, right? In addition, we have to be mindful of our strengths and our weaknesses, of our thoughts and our own emotions, right? And our ability, to develop that self-awareness is around identifying our triggers, how we can manage our own emotions in that way. And the fourth component would be self-regulation, to turn negative thoughts and feelings into positive ones, to know, when to do that pause between stimulus and response, how that reactionary piece can be mitigated by taking a pause and really thinking about it. Am I taking this personally? Half the time I recognize that I am, and I'm going to react out of that when I need to think about it, step away from that and self-regulate, right? And then motivation, that's a critical component. What is your game plan here? What are you trying to do effective with this communication, right? So that's the way that I understand our EQ.
I think about stubbing my toe. That was my initial thought when you were talking about self-regulating and taking that pause. It's interesting, like anytime that I knock something and I hurt myself, there's always a moment before I feel the pain where I'm like, okay, here it comes. And it's like I'm bracing for it. What's a good example of like an emotional trigger that we might feel and what we would do?
Like an uncomfortable, an
Yeah.
uncomfortable
Yeah.
emotion, jealousy. I mean, that's one that people are very uncomfortable feeling. Do you have a good example of
Well,
how to regulate that?
So jealous.
yeah,
There's
I'm not,
nothing wrong. This is the thing is that it's we use the word positive and negative, but it's really about these. We kind of put some of these labels on these emotions where because some of them are uncomfortable emotions and some of them feel better. They're looked at as being more positive. So jealousy is typically a very uncomfortable emotion, and it's one of those or feeling, and it's one of those feelings that we shame a lot of times, because yeah, that
we call it the green-eyed monster.
yeah. And jealousy is not the same thing as envy. That's what's so interesting to me. I mean, jealousy is a natural reaction to somebody getting the affection from somebody else that you are expecting from them, or the attention that you're expecting from that person. Envy is when you have something that somebody else wants. So they're really two very different feelings. And a lot of times we use the word jealousy to describe envy, but it comes from the word zealous, you know?
Great that you just brought that up, because I was going to sit here and tell you that I'm not a jealous person, never have been, but I'm jealous of the attention my husband gives our dog.
I mean, she's cute.
We all have that. I'm not a very jealous person. I don't need a lot of attention. However, if there's a certain need that's not being met in my relationship, and I see that my husband is paying attention to somebody in that same way that I want to be paid attention to from him, it's going to bring up some of that heat where I'm like, what's this BI doing, getting my husband's attention or whatever. It's a natural thing. I think acknowledging it. You talked about self-awareness. And to me, that's the biggest piece in emotional intelligence is being aware of yourself, being aware, like you said, your strengths, your values, and then also your emotions, your cues that elicit, a strong emotion that, that will trigger one of those things that might have happened to you when you were younger or whatever. Being aware of that. I just thought of Johari's window, that there's that area that's the open area where these are the things that I know about me and that other people know about me. And then there's this other area where we have a blind spot where other people know this about us, but we don't know this about ourselves. And what it makes me think of is that person that's always accusing everybody of being aggressive, but they're actually very they're the one that's really aggressive, but they project it onto other people. That's kind of like, that where you have this blind area of what you see in everybody else, whether it's real or imagined, is really you projecting yourself on that person. And then you have this other window that is where but they don't know. So these are things that only you know about yourself. And then there's the other area that's like unconscious, where nobody knows, you don't know, and they don't know. And so I think the hope is with emotional intelligence and self-awareness is for that area that is, first of all, that's known only to us. I mean, you want that to increase. You want that blind area where other people know you and you don't know. You want that to decrease. And I think you have to be able to ask people, what do you see, in about me here?
That was
Yeah.
like good, like professional advice that I got once. I had someone else tell me what are my best qualities and attributes and it's always a different list. It's always different. Like if I come up with 5 things that I think I'm good at, someone else will have 5 totally different things on the list.
Isn't it cool to hear that though? Because sometimes you're blind to even your strengths and the things that, that you could grow in,
Yeah.
right? You said something, Heidi, about motivation, and that made me think about that beginner's mind, like that learning mind, being curious. And I don't know if that's what that means in the emotional intelligence key components. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, because let's say you don't possess natural deep empathy, right? You
Okay.
can't, I mean, I can stand next to a person that I don't even know, and I can pick up energetically, if something's not quite right. There's something seems a little, they're unhappy or whatever. But honing in with beginner's mind when you are practicing or wanting to up your game in your emotional intelligence, especially in our interpersonal relationships, is to be curious, right? That means to listen deeply to that person, but it also means to check in with them, and some people early on in the emotional intelligence game, the awakening stage, are like, so I think you might be mad. Are you mad?
I don't know. Are you mad? I've said that so many times.
Yeah. And it's not about that, it's not about that. It's more about, tell me what you're feeling right now, being curious in that way, giving open-ended questions, right? Not planting seeds, right? That's how we stay in beginner's mind. Or you can say something simple like, I'm sensing something and I'm not quite sure what it is. What's going on with you today? Right? Just giving them an opportunity to touch in.
So having the motivation to want to grow, having that motivation, like we don't like change, but to be able to be resilient, right? To be able to be adaptable and have that motivation to go beyond those kind of barriers because we want to connect, right?
And it takes you, it's like out of yourself, rather than focusing on how this is making you feel. It's like, wait a second, let me observe what's going on
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And then the awareness, for example, a follow-up question could be, does it make you uncomfortable that I am asking you these things? Am I making you uncomfortable? Because I don't want to make you uncomfortable. That's another component of emotional intelligence. If you're not getting anything from somebody, perhaps they don't know what to say because there's discomfort there. How do you, allow for that? And, you have probably noticed that in my work meeting style in leading meetings, I'll say to people, I have a follow-up question for you that you do not have to answer, right? I always throw that out there, and, sometimes people don't answer. Sometimes people put their hand up like that and I'll be like, okay, and I move on, right? But I never ask the question without that caveat because it's not fair to them. It's not fair to ask them to divulge something they may not be ready to say, right?
Yeah, maybe they need to discover it too. Maybe they need to process it because
Yeah, and that's their emotional intelligence too, right? I mean, because you're bringing two people into a room, and like I've said before, it's not just two people. It's who I think I am, who I think you are, who I think you think I am, who you think you are, who you think I am, who you think I am. So you could have a person who doesn't have emotional intelligence, right? And you're emotionally intelligent, and you're aware of your own emotions. You're empathetic. You can kind of see where that person is, but they're not aware.
So what do you do then? So here, what do you do if you're with someone, especially in a romantic partnership, and they're not aware? How would we go about broaching conversations, deep conversations?
So tell me more, Miki, in what way are they not aware? Give me something.
Like if they're not aware of expressing their emotions, like if they have trouble not expressing their emotions, and if they shut down.
Okay.
Yeah. Like,
okay. So we've been there. I've been there. Yeah, I've been there. Are you okay? I'm okay. No, it feels like you're not. That's kind of how we play that game. So it's like, so the way that I would do it, I'll just use, in my interpersonal relationship with my husband. Obviously, I know him well enough now to know when he's not okay, but I didn't always, and he wanted to create this veneer of always being strong and, independent, and I don't need anybody, and, whatever. That was kind of his front, right?
yeah.
And I quickly learned that the reason he had to keep that up was because even though he had this sort of gruff, devil may care, F the world kind of exterior, on the inside, he's marshmallow cream. He's like just sweet and soft and sticky and, all these things. And, he had to learn somewhere along the way to protect that. Right. So in the beginning, in those types of circumstances, you've got to play to your strengths there. You got to recognize they're not ready to open up. You've got to allow them time and space. But my favorite question to ask in those situations is, tell me something you don't want to tell me about how you're feeling right now.
That made me like clench up.
Not a good question for everybody. It could land really flat, but he would say, well, I'll tell you something. I'm really pissed off that you're asking me questions like that.
That's amazing.
The motivation has to be there, right? I mean, you're talking about motivation because you can be with somebody who is not aware of their own feelings, not able to identify, I should say, their own feelings and even express them, but they might be motivated to connect with the person that they're with. So for me, I think modeling is a great way to help somebody, by saying, I feel jealous in this moment, or I feel frustrated. Can we talk about this?
Yeah, the I statements.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
Always.
I feel hurt. I feel embarrassed. Those things that we feel shame around, modeling that it's okay. Now, if you're dealing with somebody who has, like narcissistic traits or who is just not motivated, I'll say that. They might have some of the social skills, but they're not motivated, then they might turn it around on you and exploit your emotional vulnerability. And that comes with being vulnerable. You open yourself up to make the connection when you're vulnerable. And that's the whole thing of being vulnerable. You're open to getting hurt.
Yeah,
and hopefully that person isn't trying to hurt you, right?
Yeah, I've been there. I feel like I've been there in those situations, and I always clam up, because it
You
is
clam
scary.
up when somebody asks you to
When
be
I try to be vulnerable and somebody shuts it down. It's kind of like, okay, well, you don't want to hear it.
And the other piece to that, Miki, is maybe they can't hear it. Maybe they're afraid of your vulnerability because they can't fix it, because they don't understand it. There's that piece in all of this. I alluded to it earlier when we take things personally. It's like, oh, I'm being vulnerable here and you don't want to hear it. It's not personal for whatever reason. They have to put up the brake and go, I can't right now. And they don't know how to articulate that, either. So there's that piece of it. And then recognizing not everybody is emotionally available.
Yeah, that's right. What do you say? Go to the hardware store to get bread? You can't do that, right? I don't think so, right? You can't go to the
I don't think they sell bread.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So you can't really go to somebody who doesn't have it to give and expect them to be able to receive your vulnerability. I mean, I've dealt with somebody before who has very antisocial sociopathy type of narcissistic, sadistic type of behavior, and being vulnerable and not attacking always put me in a position of being exploited in some kind of way and being told, well, that's stupid. You're stupid for feeling that way, that kind of thing. And that's when you run.
Yeah.
It's not going to get any better.
Anybody who's minimizing or demeaning has no emotional intelligence that you know. Yeah.
Such good advice.
Yeah, your feelings are valid no matter what unhelpful or irrational thought that it might have manifest from. It's still a valid. You're still feeling what you're feeling. And when somebody invalidates that, that's really, it's emotional abuse, whether they recognize it or not as emotional abuse. It is. It is. Yeah.
So I was talking to a friend about like self-love and self-care, and they said that they feel selfish when they think about allowing self-love into their life. Yeah. So what do you think is the difference between setting healthy boundaries and being selfish in a relationship when it comes to self-love?
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Heidi.
No, after you.
I was just, I was kind of just processing out loud. I was thinking about the difference between everything being about you versus being about us, and prioritizing your needs so that you can have the communication and the connection.
Like it's a part of you, a part of the relationship is if you are okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
There's such a big difference between, we all have some egocentrism, I think. I mean, I don't think that you could be a human without that. We see things from our own window, whether we deny it or not, or whether we don't want to. But being able to have a worldview. You talked about empathy, Heidi. I mean, I think that's being able to understand, no, I've never been in your position. I'm not you. However, I can try to put myself in your shoes, and I can try to see something from your worldview and your perspective. That's different than selfishness and, complete egocentrism, and because you're not trying to look at the other person's perspective. When I'm even in, after I get through that initial threat response, we can talk about that if you want to, because we do have those initial reactions. Like you were talking about the stubbing the toe. That's like the tick, right? But you don't have to talk necessarily. You can recognize that response and then move yourself out of it. And part of that is, if I was a fly on the wall, or if I was another person and I was looking at this from that person's perspective, would I see it the same way, or how would I see it? And I think that's part of the whole, what Heidi was talking about, the social awareness and the empathy, wanting to communicate, right?
Exactly. And meeting people where they are and not assuming that you have any idea what they're actually feeling. That's another thing that helps people to feel comfortable. If someone were to share with me, for example, that they lost a child, I can only imagine what that feels like. And it's unimaginable to me. But if I cannot convey that to the person, like, I cannot touch your pain is what I would have to convey to them. I cannot, and I feel, I would say something, well, this is what I would say. I would say that breaks my mama heart. My mama heart is broken over that. but I cannot imagine. I would always qualify it. I cannot imagine what it is that you are feeling around that. But I am so very sorry, because it doesn't presume that I get to feel their feelings or have any idea what that's like. And I think in the deeper matters, for sure, we can put ourselves in a position of being vulnerable in that way. I can try to help you, but I cannot meet you where you are. The other side of that, you mentioned that ego piece. The other side of that is when someone does or says something to us and we have an actual reaction, like a visceral reaction in our body, and we're like, oh my God. It could be an affront. It could be a slight. It could be, a hurt. It could be a lot of things. And we cannot help being human. Our ego is going to take that personally, right out of the words and into our body. It's like that, and it could be contempt, for what you said, that expression. I felt that about a month ago in a meeting. I think I mentioned that, and it was, now I can identify it as contempt. And what I was feeling was mirrored to me, because we were in a Zoom meeting. So it was the Hollywood Squares, was mirrored to me by another person. And I thought that the look on my face was, I had I thought I had that whole thing going on. But I had that meeting as a recording and I played it later. And I was actually having that visceral experience with a complete poker face during the interaction.
But they read it.
But the person that read it and mirrored that back to me felt every ounce of what I felt in my body. It was really cool. And that was my ego. I took it personally. I totally took it personally. And I had cause to reflect on it later. And I was able to approach after the fact in a really constructive way what my feelings were, because I didn't react. I took time and I responded out of my emotional intelligence. And I recognized and I removed my ego from it, which isn't easy at all.
That's so interesting that you brought that up. When we are really connected, there's a lot of research on this. When we are empathetic, our mirror neurons will have us match the body language of the other person, or their expressions will be imitated on the face of the person who is empathizing with them. And it's a natural thing. And of course, people who have the darker traits, like the Machiavellianism and the narcissism and the sociopathy, they know that. And so they will do things to take advantage of, like, if Heidi's doing this, they'll do that with her because they know she's going to feel I'm connecting with her.
Neuro-linguistic programming. And, anyone who's been trained, as I have been, as a salesperson way back in my 20s, NLP is a big part of that, and using that, psychological ability, if someone goes like this, you get a little closer, you go like this, you mirror all those things. Yeah. No, it's interesting. We could talk about the macabre, but I want to go back to Miki's question about self-love, okay? And how we hone in on that, what that is, what differentiates it from selfishness. And so I'm going to talk about an experience that I had yesterday and this morning. So it's between me and my husband, and we had planned a very extravagant anniversary trip later this year. And that trip hinged on some variables. And one of the variables was what kind of work he would be engaged in this year and if that would be affordable to do. And I am an extravagant girl when it comes to travel. I want it to be big. I want to go big or go home. But anyway, so he was consternated because he got a job offer and he does work out of state, and it's a contract work and it's got a prescribed amount of time and a prescribed amount of dollars. And he was really on the fence about whether or not he wanted to do this work, even though that work would mean that we could afford this very expensive vacation. And so we talked about it yesterday twice. I know he had a very sleepless night over it last night. And he asked me this morning to weigh in, from my perspective. And of course, my perspective overtly, if I'm honest, was I want to go on the trip, before he even started talking about, what he did or didn't want to do vis-a-vis the work. And what I loved about it was he was completely honest. He said, this is self-love, everybody. He said, I don't want to do it. The work is too stressful. It's too long. I don't want to be away from home that long. I don't want to be in that particular city for that long. And I followed up with, because my perspective again is I want to go on this trip. But if it means that we can go to Europe, on this itinerary, he said, if I never get to go to Europe again, it's better than me having to do this kind of work. Wow. And I was like, good for you. Good for you, And that was self-awareness. That was self-respect. That was self-care. That was self-love. And what I love about it most was that he didn't put me above, right, and subjugate his feelings and do it anyway to make me happy. He didn't people please. So I love the way that it turned out. And after I said, good for you, my mind went to, I'm going anyway. That's self-love also. I will figure out how to get there with or without. Right. I'll figure it out. I might have to modify or whatever, but I know that I need this. My soul craves it. I haven't been in Europe. We haven't been together in 10 years, but I haven't been there at all in 8 years. And I am longing to be there. It fills my soul in a way that's very important to me. And, my time on earth, I don't know how long I'll be here, but I know I won't always be able-bodied and able-minded. So it's like, I'm going to figure this out. So there's my example of self-care and self-love. And I don't think any of us are being selfish in this particular scenario.
Yeah. I don't know if I would be able to. I want to be like him. I don't know if I would be able to do that. I haven't in the past, the people pleasing I'm working on.
Yeah. So I don't know a lot right now about the other than what Heidi has told us about the key components of emotional intelligence. When she was talking, what I was thinking about though, and you're asking about self-love, is after this, after this self-awareness, right? Getting to know yourself, knowing what your attachment style is, knowing what your motivators are, knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your core values are, knowing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these things. Then shifting into that, doing your check-ins, like, how am I feeling right now? Where do I feel it in my body? That metacognition, right? What caused this to come up in me? Like, what was the thought? What was going on? And
how often do you do that? Do you find that you are checking in with yourself throughout the day? Do you do it constantly or anytime you have a difficult emotion?
Yeah, that's interesting because I do it frequently because I have, for so long, I had been so disconnected from my body and was not aware of how my body was manifesting a lot of the, that's what happens, is that when we don't acknowledge and recognize the full scope of emotions, it becomes suppressed, repressed. Suppressed is when you consciously put it down, but many of us unconsciously put it down, right? And we repress it, which I've said before, repression equals depression. And my body was manifesting these things, and I thought that I had different ailments, which I did. But what was happening is that the inflammation from repressed emotions was manifesting in those different parts of my body, and I wasn't acknowledging that. And that's what happens to a lot of us, heart stuff, a lot of autoimmune stuff now that we see with people. So I do it a lot.
Big brain, right?
Say that again.
Big brain, little brain.
Yeah.
Our gut is in tune with our mental health. It's part of our mental health system.
Our brain has more serotonin in it. I mean, our gut has more serotonin in it than our brain. Our gut can tell us a lot. Yeah. Those initial reactions that we have. Some of it is bias. And that's another thing too, being aware of your biases. We all have biases and acknowledging that. That way you can be accountable for them, right? I have a bias about women being more nurturing, right? I know that that's not true logically. I know that men can be just as nurturing as women, but understanding that I have that bias will help me, right? When I'm interacting with people. So that too, but so what I was thinking about was after this awareness, as far as how to build a healthy relationship with yourself, is where the reframing the negative self-talk would come in. For me, that was a big place. And it's so subtle that I would even say, I wasn't having a negative thought about myself, but I was. It just wasn't it was almost pre-linguistic negative talk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like that I always mess up or I'm just that
Yeah.
way.
It's like almost like a different voice. Like
It
I'm really
was.
starting to hear it and it's like not me. It's just it's automatic. It's
Yeah.
already factual,
Yeah.
set in my head. It's
Yeah.
so weird.
And when I started thinking about the things that I say to myself, the feelings that I have towards myself, the thoughts that I have towards myself, I would never, never, ever have that thought about somebody else. It would be evil for me to think of people that way. So why would it be okay for me to think of myself like that? That's where, for me, that was like the crack in the door opening for me to have some kind of compassion for myself and then really be able to have compassion for other people.
Has to start with you.
Yeah, it really does. Because then it is people pleasing. And then there's resentment and things like that that go along with it, or expectations. Like, I did this and this and this and this, and they couldn't even say thank you, or whatever, right? Um,
The nerve.
I know. I just want to be appreciated around here.
My favorite thing about loving myself as I've been on this journey of self-love and discovery is I've really enjoyed being alone with myself. Like I've really, really enjoyed that. I have I heard a quote about there's a difference between being lonely and then being alone. And I find like solitude and alone time so valuable. So, what would you say to people who are afraid to be alone and they feel dysregulated and they feel lonely? How can they like redefine that alone time? Because I think it's really important
Yeah.
to
The
sit.
thing about loneliness is typically seeking external validation, seeking someone else to make you feel lovable, worthy, to make you feel okay, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that along the way in life, and I recognize I'm further down the road of life than a lot of people, but recognizing that the loneliest I've ever been was in a long marriage with a house full of kids and a barn full of animals, surrounded and abjectly lonely. And I was looking for validation and love and comfort outside of myself. I completely lost touch with who I was, and I was adrift. I was truly bereft. It was painful. It led to a dark night of the soul, you know? And I had to journey, Miki, as you are, to myself to find that self-love, to find that. And I love, that you are recognizing in your alone time the sacred space that it creates, how fulfilling it can be, how alive you can feel alone in your home with your cat.
I love my
Really
cat.
nice.
She doesn't make too much noise.
Yeah, but that is foundationally what everybody wants to get in touch with. What makes me happy? What lights me up? How do I get comfortable? What do I really like? So for people who may be struggling with loneliness, the first invitation, even though this is not what they're going to want, is to not look outside yourself. Yes, you want connection. What kind of connection do you want? Let's talk about, who you are intrinsically. Are you an introvert? What happens when you go out into social settings? Right?
I hated it.
There's so much to that, and learning about ourselves is job one, especially if we're lonely.
Yeah.
Beyonce has this song that's called Scared of Lonely. And when Heidi was speaking right now and you're asking the question, Miki, I keep thinking about that fear. It's pushing past that fear because what ends up happening is that self-fulfilling prophecy. What we are afraid of is what we end up pushing ourselves into, that loneliness. If we can truly sit in that uncomfortable fear, that uncomfortable loneliness, that to me would be a start. What are your thoughts about it sitting? When's the last time you sat with uncomfortable emotions and just sat with it.
Yeah, no, it's important. The thing that I recognized was in those dark moments back to that time was that I had everything that I ever wanted. I had a big, beautiful Victorian farmhouse. I had a house full of children, I had a barn full of animals. I had all of these things. And I started to break that down in my mind. And I said, this house cannot hug me when I cry, right? This house cannot hold me. These animals cannot be responsible. I'm responsible for them. I recognize animals give you unconditional love. Dogs in particular do. So I had 5 of those. and I pieced it out, and I recognized none of this is working. This was all of the stuff I thought from being a 4-year-old child would give me everything I wanted in life, that would make me happy. And, I'll say this out loud. I had plenty of money to leave, to go to Europe on an extravagant vacation. But even that lost its luster. It was empty because I didn't know who I was anymore, because I could not even touch what was left of me. I was really missing self-esteem. I had become mother. I had become wife. I had become the person that did things for other people. And that is empty. That is lonely.
So your identity was based on the things that you did and that you were to other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I lost my sparkle. I lost my fire. I lost my independence.
So how did you find that back?
Well, that's another podcast, isn't it?
Woo!
Yeah. The reclaiming of self-love, the reclaiming of my self-esteem, the rebuilding of my house of myself,
Like that, the Christine, what's her name? Neff? Is that her name? I don't even know. Like that kind of stuff, the radical
self-acceptance.
Is that kind of what you're talking about? Or
yeah, I did a deep dive. I read dozens of books, and there was so much. I went to therapy. I did all the things. To come home to me.
If you could name like a top self-care ritual that comes to mind that you do,
like a
to build that
self-love, daily self-love type of thing in practice.
Yeah.
The biggest one, do not say yes when you say no. When you mean no, do not say yes. That is the biggest self-love component to life.
Say it louder.
Yeah. Do not say yes when you mean no.
So you can say, I'll get back to you on that.
That's it.
Let me check my schedule.
Let me think about that.
Let me think about it. Yeah.
And then that brings it back to like the pause and to really check in with yourself.
1,000%, because many of us have been people pleasers or are currently people pleasers. And it's uncomfortable to say no. You feel guilty.
So guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is, go ahead.
Well, like that reminds me when you were talking about like jealousy and what was the other term?
Versus envy?
Versus envy. For me, I do feel them closely in a professional capacity, because for me, what usually is if I have a job and I claim ownership of that job and then I don't do the job and somebody else does the job, that's when I'm like, oh God, I messed up and everybody's mad at me. And I'm envious of that person for solving the problem before I did. And like that's all I was thinking about.
And then you're jealous of the person's
praise,
accolades that they're getting, right?
It's not my job. And not everybody's mad at me. And it's okay.
Yeah. And that's hard to transition to, Miki.
It is.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you talk to yourself when you make a mistake? That's a really good, a powerful question to ask yourself. And it can really be a good indicator of whether you're giving yourself love.
I made a huge mistake this morning.
That's okay. And how'd you talk to yourself?
I was like, oh my God, that was just awful. And it was a live meeting, and it was a meditation meeting, and I messed up my script, and I really messed it up. And I was just like, that was so bad. And I was, when I got off when I finally signed off of the meeting, I spent 5 minutes going, what in the heck happened? And I knew, I figured out what had happened. And then I actually put my shoulders up and I went, oh, well.
Oh, well.
Like, oh, well. And then I moved on, and then I shared it later. I shared it with Miki, and then I shared it with Lee later. I shared it with some people that were there, or Miki wasn't there today, but anyway, but who would, who would understand. And it was, it was a non-thing. I can say that it was a non-thing. No one was harmed in me messing up the meditation meeting this morning, but I didn't beat myself up. And that is self-love.
Yeah.
I literally shook it off within a few minutes.
I think I deal with a lot of things with humor. Somebody asked earlier if I don't like being teased. And it's funny because I try, very hard not to tease other people, but I don't mind being teased when it's done in a way that there's not contempt with it, right? Or resentment with it. I actually enjoy it. I get a kick out. And so I do that with myself a lot of times. I acknowledge the mistake by laughing about it and turning it into a funny thing with myself. Some people might call that self-deprecation, but it's not in the way that I do it. I'm trying to think of an example right now, but I can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
And
love the oh well. That's my favorite. Oh well. I'm trying to do that more when something bad happens.
yeah. Yeah. Giving yourself, just a big old permission slip to not do it perfectly or even okay.
Yes.
That is a whole other podcast. That is it. And perfect is unattainable. Perfect actually doesn't exist.
Right. And I say this all the time. People are probably sick of me saying it. You never reach mastery through perfection. You reach mastery by making mistakes. The best of the best of the best in the world at what they do got to where they are because they've made mistakes and they learned from their mistakes. They didn't stay stuck in it. They didn't ruminate on it. Okay, this is what I can do better. Move forward.
I have
Yeah.
one more question back to the primary emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious. I don't know if you know, but is there one that happens the most often? Or even for you personally, like if you're thinking like what's your go-to, or does it like change depending on the scenario? Like I'm wondering like what's my first primary emotion?
I think it would depend on the situation. That's what makes them so raw and why it makes them universal because they went to these different cultures. What's so cool about these is you can even see them on a blind person who's never seen somebody's face before. So they're not imitating what they've seen. They're making these expressions of like disgust, when they smell something bad, a baby, or whoever.
Disgusting.
Right. Anger, your lips get thinner, your eyebrows might furrow. That can also look like concentration. A real content.
Constipation.
That's one for sure.
Might be a smile, it might not be a smile, but real smiling is with your eyes, right? So there's things depending on the situation.
Which one do you recognize the most in yourself, would you say, more these days?
I recognize contentment more, but I also, because I'm so aware of micro expressions and I see different things, when I feel like my nose, I'm like, am I being judgmental here in this situation? Because that's a disgust response. So what's happening here? What is this? Where is this coming from? I think I'm kind of hyper aware though of those things. I know that a lot of times when I'm listening to people, they feel concerned because but that's my like, I'm being attentive and I'm listening look.
Yeah, I was going to say that's part and parcel of deep listening, being in the zone. I do the same thing. It's a consternation kind of a look, but it's like I'm engaged fully and my brain is like working through what I'm trying to discern from this person, and, as coaches, you and I both, have been trained to be very active listeners. I think that's part and parcel of what we're doing when we've got our coaching hat on. Right.
Yeah. Sometimes I won't do it like physically, but I'll consciously go like this because I know how it can be received when I'm, really like, paying attention to what somebody's saying and they're perceiving it. If they don't have good emotional intelligence, right, or have high emotional intelligence, they might perceive it as anger or as disappointment. Kids do that a lot, right? When they see a parent afraid, they perceive it as anger, right? Emotionally
Yeah.
unintelligent people would perceive things like that, as
I perceive it as needing Botox.
I don't like that because I can't read people as well when they have Botox.
Right. You don't know.
They're
so I
making
think,
it harder on me for me to read.
right?
I'll be sure to warn you before I get a tune-up, okay?
Thank you. I think my last question is, I have an answer for it. If there's one takeaway that someone listening or watching can do today to work on their emotional intelligence to become better, what would you say is like one thing that they could work on? For me, I think journaling.
Okay.
Journaling is mine for sure, because that's how I got to know myself.
I will offer this. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And this is what I know about listening. Most people listen with the intent to respond. Be listening with the intent to understand. That's the one
That's
for
a
me.
bar. That's a bar. How about you, Dr. Lovey?
I'm trying to like which one would be priority. Like there's so many things that come to mind. Being curious is big. Stopping and
The pause.
scanning your body. Where do I feel any tension? My neck is tense. My chest is tense. There's certain things that are indicators of feelings. Like when your hands get hot, that's an indication of anger. When your hands get cold, that's an indication of fear. Because, it's a physiological thing that happens with us. So for me, that's, a big part of what I do is, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? If my chest, my neck could talk to me, what would it say to me? Identifying the feeling that I'm experiencing and being curious, like Heidi was talking about the other person. If I'm not alone, if there's somebody else in the mix, being curious about what they're feeling, what they're experiencing from their perspective, and trying to get outside of myself. Watch whatever's going on. Watch it like it's a movie. Watch it like I'm somebody else watching it, not myself. How would I experience it? Am I able to connect with the other person deeper? So, I can keep going on and on. There's like so many things I can't even
All
say.
the things. Everybody do all of the things.
The one thing from Dr. Lovey is all the things.
All the things. Identifying. Yeah, identifying.
Yeah.
That's really big.
So good. I feel more emotionally intelligent now. I hope that everyone does too.
Goal,
That's the goal.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll say bye-bye. We just want to thank everybody so much. Thank you so much for the support. Please make sure that you are following us on social media. Like, comment, subscribe, download, share. Share this with anybody who you think might need to hear it today. And that's all I got.
Bye.
Self-love revolution.
Arrivederci.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Lifing Coast to Coast. Join us every Saturday for insightful, relatable, and lively discussions that empower and inspire.